Chapter 1261. It was time for her to return to the entertainment industry. Even if it wasn't for herself, it was for Mu Yun to have a better life. Every time Mu Yun changed his blood, it would cost a lot of money. She had to go back. Wang Ziyun's mouth moved for a long time before she said weakly, "You must hate me very much, right?" That was why she hadn't come back for 4 years. In the past few years, Wang Ziyun's mind was much clearer, but her body was much weaker. Most of the time, she could only stay in this small room and look at the sky outside through the window, thinking about her Yizun and her daughter. She was just wondering why Liangqiu didn't come again. No matter how this child treated her, he would never leave her. However, it had been 4 years. She waited until she was about to die before Liangqiu came back to send her off. She even brought a child with her. Wang Ziyun didn't ask who the child was. She vaguely knew that it wasn't a good birth. What a sin. She panted a few times and looked at Liangqiu. Liangqiu stood there with a cold expression. "What kind of answer do you want?" Wang Ziyun rolled her eyes and almost turned her back. Mu Yun was a little scared and wanted his mother to hold him. Liangqiu buried his little face in her arms and looked at Wang Ziyun. "I don't hate you. You are the one who is more pitiful." She couldn't see her daughter until she died. Yizun was dead, and so was his father. Who knew if it was retribution for Wang Ziyun's evil deeds? Liangqiu's heart was filled with sorrow. Looking at Wang Ziyun's eyes, she knew that she was going to die soon. She walked out and handed little Mu Yun to the auntie. Then, she stepped into the cold room again. It was June. There was no heating or air conditioning in this room. It was still cold. Wang Ziyun took a while to recover. She lowered her head and there was a strange glow in her eyes. She stretched her hand forward as if she wanted to grab Liangqiu's hand. However, the distance between them was too far. Her efforts were in vain. Wang Ziyun's voice was mournful. Liangqiu, can you call me mother one more time?" 2 drops of tears rolled down from the corners of his shriveled eyes. They looked ice-cold. Liangqiu took a step back and smiled bitterly. "Have you ever loved me?" This was Wang Ziyun's last moment. She suddenly wanted to know. Wang Ziyun turned her head away again. She lay flat on her back and shook her head continuously. After a long time, she lowered her head again. "I don't know." There was a hint of anticipation in her eyes. Liangqiu slowly squatted down, looked into Wang Ziyun's eyes, and said softly, "In life, there should always be some regrets, right?" Wang Ziyun's eyes widened as she looked at Liangqiu in horror. Then, her pupils dilated again and again. Her hand drooped down weakly. From now on, Wang Ziyun no longer existed in this world. Liangqiu did not move. She was still squatting down and looking into Wang Ziyun's eyes. Her voice became even softer. "You don't love me, but I used to hope that after you hugged Yizun, you could hug me too." Her fingers landed on Wang Ziyun's face and she closed her eyes. "Mother." She had thought that she would not be sad, but at this moment, she felt that she had really bid farewell to the past. Everything in the past had been erased. All that was left was her and Mu Yun. Wang Ziyun's funeral was simple. Liangqiu was mourning for her for the last time. She had raised her, so she had to be filial for once. Chapter 1262. It had been 4 years since Liangqiu debuted. The fans held a memorial for her. This year, there was still no main character appearing. In front of King Entertainment's building, the 3,000 fans had meticulously set up the venue and were carrying out their activities in an orderly manner. What Keim found particularly puzzling was that these fans could actually remember that one work for so long. It was obvious that Liangqiu was a natural superstar. Standing behind Qin Anlan, he was well aware of Liangqiu's place in President Qin's heart. Otherwise, how could he have allowed these fans to cause trouble in front of King Entertainment's building? He was afraid that President Qin was trying to maintain Liangqiu's popularity. At one point, he even suspected that President Qin was behind all of this. At that moment, looking at the crazed screaming fans below, Keim asked Qin Anlan with a headache, "President Qin, do we need to deploy the special forces?" But Qin Anlan didn't answer his question. He asked calmly, "Is it the 4th anniversary of her debut?" Kaim was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Yes. After a pause, he continued, President Qin also feels that it's a pity for Yi Liangqiu, right? He had predicted that she would become popular, but he hadn't expected it to be to such an extent. Most of Yi Liangqiu's fans were female, which was a particularly strange phenomenon. Especially since many of the younger fans called her hubby. Kaim didn't quite understand how young people thought these days. Qin Anlan said calmly, let's go down and take a look. Kaim was stunned. There was only a small group of fans downstairs, and it was another 3,000 fans who were waiting for their hubby. Would President Qin be eaten up if he went down? Because there were rumors among Yi Liangqiu's fans that Yi Liangqiu had been banned, it was very dangerous for President Qin to do this. Before Kaim could stop him, Qin Anlan had already gone downstairs. He hurriedly followed. Downstairs, the fans were in high spirits. They waved the light in their hands and shouted Yi Liangqiu's name over and over again. On King Entertainment's big screen, the scene of A Gentle Breeze Blows played over and over again. Even when Qin Anlan walked over and looked at it, his eyes were also filled with tears. That long-lost feeling. He recalled that when she was filming this film, he had guided her in the kissing scene. He had told her, look at me, and you'll know how to do it. She had filmed a classic and everyone in the entertainment industry was waiting for her. Kaim asked the security guards to clear the way for Qin Anlan so that he could stand in the front row. At this time, the fans were crying like crazy, calling for Yi Liangqiu to come back. This was the first time that Qin Anlan had experienced it so closely. His heart tightened, and he couldn't tell what he was feeling. He lifted his eyes to look at her beauty on the screen, and his eyes were a little hot. He was there when the last scene was shot. Now that he saw it again, it felt like he had returned to 4 years ago. The voices in his ears were even more fervent, but Qin Anlan's world seemed to have quietened down. His gaze was fixed on the person slowly walking up the stage. It was Yi Liangqiu. She was wearing a pair of white trousers, and her long hair had already reached her waist. She stood on the stage without using a microphone, and with tears in her eyes, she said softly to the fans below, I'm back. I'm back, King Entertainment. I'm back, the world that I don't miss, but I have no choice but to return to. I'm back, and this time, I'll stand at the top of the world. The lights shone on her. At this moment, she was the center of attention. At this moment, she was so dazzling that even Qin Anlan had to look up to her. He stood right in front of her, but her gaze never fell on him. Chapter 1263. At that moment, Qin Anlan's loneliness for the past 4 years reached its peak. And he couldn't get rid of it. He was just like those fans, looking up at her, dazzling. Listening to her, she's back. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was as if he had waited for so long, and she was finally back. But when she came back, she was no longer the same as before. Although it was only a few words, although she still looked cold and indifferent, Qin Anlan knew that the Yi Liangqiu in front of him was no longer the same Yi Liangqiu as before. Just as he had hoped, she no longer had any expectations. They were now in a safe zone. He just looked at her, his gaze complicated. Kaim watched from the side, thinking to himself that something wasn't right. There was really something wrong with President Qin's gaze. It wasn't the gaze of a subordinate who had disappeared willfully for a few years. It was the gaze of a lover who had been missing for a long time. Kaim didn't dare to say anything. He just looked at this and that. The fans beside him started crying, screaming, and emotional. The scene was out of control, and a large number of fans rushed onto the stage. At this moment, it was very easy to be trampled. Qin Anlan took a few quick steps onto the stage. He held Yi Liangqiu's hand and said in a low voice, "Come with me." Yi Liangqiu's gaze fell on his face. There was a hint of shock in her eyes. Qin Anlan laughed bitterly. He held her fingers and gently pulled her into his arms. With an arm around her shoulders, he quickly left the scene under Kaim's instructions. After they left, Kaim led about a dozen security guards to disperse the crowd. But the fans refused to leave. They stood together in front of King Entertainment's building, calling out Yi Liangqiu's name. Their idol was finally back. It was a sleepless night. Meanwhile, Qin Anlan held Yi Liangqiu's hand as they walked to his personal elevator. The moment they reached the elevator, she shook off his hand and stood by the elevator wall. She said calmly, "President Qin." His tone was polite and respectful, no longer as intimate as before. Qin Anlan was also stunned for a moment, and then he faintly agreed. The atmosphere was a little strange. No one spoke again until they reached his office. Only then did he take the lead and walk in. Yi Liangqiu followed behind. After the door was closed, Qin Anlan walked to his desk and sat down. He looked at her with burning eyes. "Ying Jie knows that you're back, right?" Yi Liangqiu didn't hide it from him and nodded. At this moment, Qin Anlan looked at her carefully. 4 years had passed, and she had matured a little more, as well as a little more perseverance. However, her appearance hadn't changed much. She was still beautiful and alluring. He lit a cigarette in frustration. "What are you going to do?" After taking a puff, he looked at her quietly. Yi Liangqiu chuckled. "That depends on what President Qin will do." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked into her eyes. He had to admit that Yi Liangqiu was different today. She had become a little sly. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the crazy fans below. Then he turned his face to the side. His handsome features looked especially deep. His voice was a little hoarse. "Yi Liangqiu, you should know that in a situation like this, if King Entertainment wants to do anything to you, these fans will probably tear down this building." These few years, she hadn't been around, but he had seen the power of her fans. Chapter 1264. At the very least, she would reach the peak of the industry and even become a classic. Yi Liangqiu was slightly stunned, and then she smiled lightly. She looked at him. "Qin Anlan, do you still have your promise?" "Yi Liangqiu, you're already famous," he said calmly. "I'd like to invite you back to King Entertainment now. Are you willing?" Her lips curled into a slight smile. Looking at him in such a dark night made him feel as though she was glowing. She said softly, "Thank you for transferring my income into your account all these years." Although she hadn't done anything, the reshoots of the advertisement and the endorsement had all been transferred to her on time. Perhaps he hadn't done it himself, but without his permission, she didn't think anyone would have done it. "You deserve it." He pursed his thin lips. Suddenly, he felt a little tired talking to her, or rather, lonely. Now that business had become official, there was no longer any interest. Qin Anlan's tone was a little indifferent. "Let's leave it at that. Ying Jie will tell you about the rest." "Okay." She was even more indifferent than him. "I'll go back first." She nodded and walked towards the door. She didn't look back, nor did she have the slightest reluctance to leave. At the door, Qin Anlan suddenly called her name. He said in a low voice, "Yi Liangqiu, where have you been these past few years?" Yi Liangqiu placed her hand on the door handle and didn't move for a long time. After a long time, she turned around and smiled. "I went to a small city in the south." He looked at her deeply, as though he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say a word. Yi Liangqiu opened the door and walked out. Qin Anlan looked at her tall and slender back view, his gaze fixated. He took a few deep puffs of his cigarette and felt his chest tighten. Her return seemed to be even worse than if she hadn't come back. Qin Anlan sat in his office for the whole night and only wiped his face at dawn. Looking out the window again, the fans downstairs from last night were no longer there. Only the trash left at the scene proved that they had been there. It also proved that Yi Liangqiu had indeed returned. Kaim knocked on the door and entered. He looked rather tired. As he walked over, he rubbed the space between his brows. "Those young girls are too noisy. They won't leave until dawn." Qin Anlan said nothing. Kaim looked at his expression and guessed what he was thinking. President Qin, about Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan raised his eyes to look at Kaim. After a while, he turned his chair around and looked at the white sky outside the window. Then he said hoarsely, "Prepare a press conference. The theme is Yi Liangqiu's return." He was relieved. In fact, Ying Jie had asked him to ask. After he left, Qin Anlan sat alone for a long time. That night, that day, he had a feeling that he had completely lost the good times he had with Yi Liangqiu. He thought that if he had said that he was going to break up and she had told him that she would keep a safe distance, Would he still be willing to give them a chance? He thought he would. But Yi Liangqiu, she was Yi Liangqiu. Why would she beg him? If she was willing to beg him, then she wouldn't be Yi Liangqiu. She would only be a mediocre woman, not a superstar on the international stage. Yes, he wanted to make her an international superstar, not just in Asia, but the glory of the Chinese people. His expectations for Yi Liangqiu were higher than any other female star. Perhaps, he had been waiting for her. Chapter 1265. Yi Liangqiu went to look for Ying Jie. Ying Jie asked worriedly, "President Qin didn't make things difficult for you, did he?" As she spoke, she walked to the sofa with Yi Liangqiu and sat down. Yi Liangqiu shook her head. "No." Ying Jie heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "I thought so too. I've been watching you coldly all these years. President Qin must have been looking down on you." Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly but didn't say anything. Was he looking down on her? If he was, it was because she was an artist, not because her name was Yi Liangqiu. Perhaps, when she heard him say that he didn't need a child, she should have completely given up and not looked for him. That would be asking for humiliation. Ying Jie looked at her expression and knew that she still couldn't let it go, but she pretended not to care. Looking at the past few years, the gossip about President Qin was enough to make a woman give up. Ying Jie didn't have high hopes for them now, even though they had already given birth to a child. The two talked for a while, and then Ying Jie sent her to the parking lot. Yi Liangqiu lived in the suburbs of B City. She drove a white BMW. After getting in the car and fastening the seatbelt, Ying Jie was still worried. She came over again and said in a low voice, "This time, don't be so silly. Actually, a woman's puberty was only so long. It was not worth it to do it for a man. Only by holding on to what she should hold on to, would her future be secure." Yi Liangqiu knew what Ying Jie meant. She smiled faintly and said, "I know." This time, she came back just to gain a foothold in the entertainment industry and give Mu Yun a good future. She didn't want to continue her relationship with Qin Anlan. She, Yi Liangqiu, did not need him. As he spoke, he started the car. The car slowly left the parking lot, and Ying Jie watched from behind. She sighed in her heart. In fact, even if President Qin wanted to marry her, given the background of the two parties, it was unlikely to be possible. Sometimes, a marriage of unequal social status would really not lead to happiness. Yi Liangqiu tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Yes, Ying Jie always knew that she had a baby, but Ying Jie didn't tell Qin Anlan. In the past few years, if it weren't for Ying Jie, giving birth to Mu Yun alone would not have been so smooth. It would have been much more difficult. The car drove for an hour before arriving at a small white villa in the suburbs. It was located in a secluded place, and on such a night, it seemed even more tranquil. Aunt Zhong opened the gate for her and drove her car in. As soon as she got out of the car, Aunt Zhong said anxiously, "Miss Yi, there's a young girl at home. She said she's your relative. I didn't drive her away, so I stayed until now." Yi Liangqiu felt suspicious and walked in with Aunt Zhong. The person inside surprised her, and her blood froze. It was Su Cheng. How did she know that she lived here? Besides, she had only been back in B City for a few days, so no one should know. Unless this person had been following her. Then, Su Cheng knew everything about her in the past few years. Yi Liangqiu was terrified, but she didn't show it on her face. She just asked calmly, "What are you doing here?" Su Cheng was wearing a light purple dress, and her hair was combed like a princess. She looked very grand, as if she was attending a banquet. She looked at Yi Liangqiu and smiled sweetly. "Of course I'm here to see you, Sister Liangqiu. I don't deserve to be called your sister." Yi Liangqiu's voice became cold. Chapter 1266. Su Cheng looked at Yi Liangqiu with a very strange look in her eyes. She seemed to be stunned for a moment before she said, "Sister Liangqiu, do you really hate me so much?" Yi Liangqiu looked at her and sneered, "What do you think?" Su Cheng was still sitting like a little princess, with her fingers on the hem of her dress. She had obviously dressed up tonight, and it was already late at night, but her makeup was not wrong at all. It could be seen that she had put in a lot of effort. Yi Liangqiu only felt that it was a little ridiculous. Su Cheng seemed to attach great importance to this meeting, but there was really no need to do this. Su Yang's beautiful orange-shaped lips curled into a smile. I know you can't forget me these past few years. Yi Liangqiu frowned. And Su Cheng's next words made her even more uncomfortable. If you remember Yi Zun for a day, you will not forget me. This was equivalent to poking Yi Liangqiu's sore spot. Su Cheng killed Yi Zun. She had not yet looked for Su Cheng, but Su Cheng had come to her door to remind her again and again. Her thin and small lips were pressed into a straight line. She looked at Su Cheng and said, "Don't worry, I will look for you when the time comes." Su Cheng's eyes were a little complicated. She looked down and smiled. Sister Liangqiu, aren't you afraid that I will tell others that you have a child? Think about it, if I tell others, will your fans still call your name so crazily and support you? Yi Liangqiu's eyes narrowed, and she looked at Su Cheng with a little danger. Sister Liangqiu, do you want to kill me? Su Cheng laughed a little crazily. Yi Liangqiu kept looking at her. Su Cheng suddenly stopped laughing. The child is Qin Anlan's, right? No. Yi Liangqiu spat out 2 words coldly. Only she knew how weak her body was when she said those 2 words. She was cold all over. She couldn't imagine what Qin Anlan would do after Su Cheng said all this. But Su Cheng told her, Aunt Qin is a traditional woman who values family status very much. She will never accept you as her daughter-in-law. Uncle Qin passed away very early, and Aunt Qin brought up Anlanji alone and handed over King Entertainment to him. Anlanji will never go against Aunt Qin's wishes. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng coldly and said, "What do you want?" Su Cheng chuckled happily. After a while, she tilted her head and said, "I don't want anything. I just want to play with you." Play? I'm not a toy for you to kill time with. Yi Liangqiu's voice was stern. I'm not Yi Zun. Of course you're not him. Sister Liangqiu is so smart. How could she be such a stupid person? Su Cheng smiled weirdly and her voice was so soft that it made one's hair stand on end. Sister Liangqiu, don't let me go if you hate me. Yi Liangqiu looked at her for a long time before she said coldly, don't you think you're a pervert? In her opinion, Su Cheng's willfulness had killed Yi Zun, but Su Cheng herself was a tragedy. Su Cheng giggled. Yes, I'm a pervert. But it's fun. After a while, she looked at Yi Liangqiu strangely. I forgot to tell you, Sister Liangqiu, I'm going to enter the entertainment industry too. As the apple of ATV's eye, Su Cheng was good-looking, so it was easy for her to become famous. Yi Liangqiu felt a chill on her back. She felt that she was being targeted by Su Cheng. As for the reason, she didn't know. Chapter 1267. Su Cheng stood up and suddenly said, Mu Yun is very cute. He looks more like you. When she spoke, there was a touch of gentleness on her little face, as if she was missing something. However, Yi Liangqiu broke out in a cold sweat. Su Cheng didn't stay any longer and left quickly. Watching the pure white disappear into the night, Yi Liangqiu was stunned for a long time. Then she called Aunt Zhong and pursed her lips, don't let Miss Su in again. Although Aunt Zhong avoided it, she could more or less see some subtle changes in their interaction, so she felt a little uneasy and nodded, yes, I know. Late at night, Yi Liangqiu didn't feel sleepy at all. Su Cheng was obviously here for her, and she also believed that Su Cheng wouldn't tell Qin Anlan about Mu Yun. If she had told him, she wouldn't have come. Then why did Su Cheng do it? Just to play with her? Yi Liangqiu didn't fall asleep until dawn. She only slept for a while, and when she was sleepy, a little person climbed on her. She opened her eyes and saw Mu Yun. Mu Yun, who was only 3 years old, was already smart and cute. Most of his looks were similar to her, but there was still the charm of Qin Anlan in his eyes. Occasionally, she would stare at Mu Yun in a daze. She reached out and stroked her son's soft hair, saying gently, Why aren't you sleeping? Yi Mu Yun propped up his little chin a little proudly. It's already 8 o'clock, Mom. He pinched her nose with his little hand and said, Mom, wake up. Mom said that today is your first day at work. If he didn't mention it, Yi Liangqiu would have forgotten. After a few years, She almost forgot that she also had to work. She smiled and let her son sit on her belly for a while. She told him a story to make up for last night. Little Moo Yoon was very sensible. After hearing this, he put on his one-piece and went down. He rolled to the side and obediently went to prepare a towel and toothbrush for his mother. Yi Liangqiu went downstairs, and the two of them stood together to brush their teeth. She looked at Moo Yoon and herself in the mirror and smiled. However, he lowered his eyes, feeling a little heartache. Moo Yoon was very sensible, but he had to bear a lot of pain that adults couldn't bear. It was probably because she didn't protect the child well during her pregnancy that Moo Yoon was born with a disease. Wherever he was touched, he would turn green and bleed uncontrollably, but it was not a serious case of sepsis. Dr. Lin said that he would recover in his 20s. This sentence was the driving force that supported Yi Liangqiu until now. She had to earn more money. Because Moo Yoon had Rh-negative blood. In order to ensure Moo Yoon's safety, she found 2 people with Rh-negative blood through the doctor and spent a lot of money to convince them to roll up their sleeves when Moo Yoon needed blood. But as Moo Yoon grew up, he needed more and more blood. So she needed money, a lot of money. Before Yi Liangqiu went out, she told Auntie Zhong to take good care of Moo Yoon and drove to King Entertainment. That morning, King Entertainment held a press conference for her to announce her comeback. Chapter 1268. There were only a few dozen first-class media outlets. Now that half of them had left, the seats were empty. It inevitably made people feel cold. It wouldn't look good if word got out that they had made up the numbers at the last minute. Yi Liangqiu paused for a moment and looked at Ying Jie. Change it to an exclusive interview. If possible, we can do a live broadcast and find someone to watch it. I think the response should be better than the original effect. Ying Jie originally had such an idea, but she was afraid that Yi Liangqiu wouldn't be willing or couldn't control such a scene. But now, she didn't have such doubts at all, so she immediately reported it to Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan muttered to himself for a moment before agreeing. During the live broadcast, the popular host, Nana, was invited to talk to Yi Liangqiu about her recent plans. At first, Sister Ying and Qin Anlan thought that with Yi Liangqiu's personality, she would probably walk the cold and aloof path. But when they thought about it, she was very approachable. Her gaze in front of the camera was indescribably warm. It immediately reminded them of the last scene of A Gentle Breeze. I think this movie should be considered as a natural performance. Yi Liangqiu tilted her head and looked at Nana. Yes, I might be a little timid when it comes to relationships. If I don't dare to tell him, I might just wait where I am. As Yi Liangqiu spoke, he also smiled slightly. It's just like the role in Qingfeng Shulai's movie. Because the male lead's halo is too dazzling, I might not have the courage to fight for it. After saying this, she was also sad. Nana was stunned for a moment, but she quickly adjusted and continued to ask, then, has our Liangqiu met such a male lead in life? Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes for a long time before she looked up at the camera, but Qin Anlan was also in the direction of the camera, so her eyes met with his. At that moment, his body trembled. Soon, her eyes were fixed on the camera, and she smiled calmly. Yes, but you should be relieved now. He felt relieved. Hearing her words, Qin Anlan felt that he should be relieved. But for some reason, from now on, he kind of hated Yi Liangqiu. He didn't know the reason, but he just hated it. Nana was very good at following up. She quickly smiled and said, Liangqiu's words must have resonated with many in the audience. I believe that we have all liked someone before. Perhaps he is high and mighty, but that doesn't stop us from liking him. However, if one day he enters our lives, we will discover that reality isn't so beautiful. Because of the difference, we are destined to be unable to walk together. The image froze on Yi Liangqiu's face. There was a hint of regret and melancholy on her face. However, Qin Anlan knew that all of this was no longer for him, but for the script of the live broadcast. She was damn good. After the live broadcast ended, the director team started to celebrate. This live broadcast had more than 5 million viewers, breaking the records of many A-list celebrities. However, Qin Anlan's face was gloomy as he called Yi Liangqiu away. Ying Jie was worried and reminded her carefully, President Qin doesn't look good, don't provoke him. Yi Liangqiu nodded and walked out briskly, even saying goodbye to Nana. Chapter 1269. Ying Jie couldn't say too much, so she just smiled and said, maybe it's because of my period. Her words were suggestive, because everyone knew that President Qin hadn't had many scandals recently. Nana covered her mouth and laughed. Ying Jie, you're so vicious. As she said that, she patted Sister Ying's arm and said, your company has dug up a treasure. I've never seen anyone who has been in retirement for a few years and can still be so popular when they make a comeback. If they can produce another 1 or 2 good films, they'll be able to become an A-lister. Ying Jie nodded and said, it's a pity for the past few years, but... She changed the topic. She suddenly became popular a few years ago, so it's good for her to retire. After all, she was young at that time and wasn't used to the Vanity Fair. It's just right now. After all, she was only 23 years old, which was still very young. Nana thought about it and lowered her voice. Did you notice that she looks a lot like Lin Qingxia when she was young? She doesn't look very outstanding at first glance, but her facial features and figure are impeccable. Ying Jie smiled and said, that's because you like her. She's good no matter how you look at her. You don't like her? Nana smiled and said, I've never seen you help a newcomer like this, Ying Jie. Ying Jie didn't say anything. She just smiled and saw Nana off. When she turned around, Yi Liangqiu hadn't come down yet. She sent a message to Kaim and asked him to keep an eye on her. At this moment, Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu were standing in his office together. He was smoking with his back to her. Yi Liangqiu looked at his tense back and thought of what Ying Jie had said in private. She agreed with him. Qin Anlan was probably having a bad period, so he had a weird temper. It was better for her not to get into trouble. He smoked half a cigarette before turning around and saying in a hoarse voice, how does it feel to use your past to please the public, Ms. Yi? He stared at her, not letting go of any expression on her face. Yi Liangqiu didn't have much expression on her face. After a while, she said softly, President Qin thinks too much. He slowly walked over, approaching step by step. She retreated step by step until she reached the door and pressed her body against it. His body was tightly pressed against hers. She could only restrain herself to prevent her sensitive parts from touching him. However, the more she did this, the more her senses were magnified. Even the contact of a single paw was enough to make her tremble. His hands were on top of her head, trapping her. She couldn't move. Am I thinking too much? He lowered his face and was very, very close to her, so close that they could see themselves in each other's eyes. Yi Liangqiu tilted her head slightly, as if she was sending her lips to his. As long as he spoke, he would be able to kiss her. Of course, this is all scripted. She looked at him fearlessly. Even though her back was sweating, her legs were weak, and even though she knew that her body was slightly changing because of his contact, she still looked very calm. Qin Anlan trapped her with one hand and slowly moved his other hand down from her shoulder to her arm. Little by little, the back of his hand occasionally brushed against places that shouldn't be brushed. They both trembled at the same time. His gaze was unfathomable and indescribable. However, he continued to move down, grabbed her hand, and slowly felt a small notebook in her hand. Chapter 1270. He took it over and still held her captive as he read through it quickly. As he read, his expression turned ugly. It turned out that every answer she gave was carefully planned. It turned out that the so-called past that she mentioned had nothing to do with him, Qin Anlan. He felt as if his face had been ruthlessly slapped, and it was burning with pain. How could she not see that he was angry out of humiliation? So she said calmly, President Qin, let bygones be bygones. There's no need to bring it up again. She looked at him. I think to President Qin, sleeping pills and pillows have expiration dates. Once they're over, they're over. I'm not the only one, so I won't think about it. President Qin, please don't take it to heart. She said it coldly, as if she was reminding him. The other side of Qin Anlan's face seemed to have been slapped by her again. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Have you forgotten everything? Yes, she said resolutely. He let go of her and turned to walk to the French window. He stood there and looked at the scenery of B City. After a while, he said, It's good that you've forgotten. Yi Liangqiu, there are still some clothes for you there. Go and get them when you have time. She nodded. I will. She was so determined without a trace of reluctance. It made him hate her even more. He suddenly turned around and looked at her with a sneer. Yi Liangqiu, you've turned your life into acting. You're a natural actress. President Qin, you're flattering me. It's better than President Qin acting without knowing it, she replied. He glared at her because of her disrespect. Yi Liangqiu looked at him indifferently. When I'm insulted, I'll retaliate, no matter who it is. What she didn't say was that if it was anyone else, she would have judged the situation. However, Qin Anlan, I told myself in my heart that I will never lower my head to you again, I will never beg you again. What I want, I will ask you for it openly. I will fight for it. I will never kneel at your feet and beg for it again. This was probably her self-esteem. Qin Anlan's voice was a little tense. I'll wait for you to get it tonight. All right. But I don't want to see a woman there, she said bluntly. President Qin, I don't think it's difficult to respect each other, right? When she said this, he remembered that she had seen Shen Lian in his house on the day she left. In reality, there was nothing between him and Shen Lian. Perhaps at that time, he still couldn't let it go, but now, it was even less likely that he would. Shen Lian was now focused on dealing with Pei Chichi. How would she have the time to look for him? However, in his opinion, she was daydreaming. Did she think that after Pei Chichi left, it would be her turn? Thinking of Pei Chichi, he compared her to Yi Liangqiu. He was a little confused. In the end, he smiled. Pei Chichi's personality was a little cuter. The woman in front of him, on the other hand, only knew how to be rude. He thought that he was willing to tolerate her bad temper because he wanted her to become a superstar. However, he had never thought that Yi Liangqiu was willing to return to the entertainment industry today, which meant that she had already put down her pride. In front of him, she was uncompromising and disrespectful. Just like a child, the more she had a crush on someone, the more arrogant she would be in front of that person. Yi Liangqiu was like this, and so was Qin Anlan. He thought that he liked Pei Chichi, but when he first saw Pei Chichi, he thought of Yi Liangqiu. Chapter 1271. That night, Yi Liangqiu asked Auntie Zhong to go to his apartment, but she couldn't get it because Qin Anlan wanted Yi Liangqiu to get it herself. Auntie Zhong was from City H. When she returned, she said to Yi Liangqiu, that guy is really handsome, but he's too cold. I think he likes Miss Yi. Yi Liangqiu saw that she didn't have anything in her hands and knew that Auntie Zhong didn't get it. She forced a smile and didn't say anything. She didn't want it anymore. Not long after she returned to King Entertainment, Sister Ying helped her take on 2 shows. One was a commercial film, and the other was an artistic film like A Gentle Breeze Blows. However, the 2 shows were filmed almost at the same time, so it was tough. When Yi Liangqiu left, she was worried about Mu Yun. Auntie Zhong said that it would be fine to leave him to her, so she was willing to leave. On one hand, if she brought him near the set and something happened to Mu Yun, she wouldn't be able to save him. After thinking about it, she decided to leave Mu Yun in the care of Auntie Zhong and Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin was in his 30s and had always treated Mu Yun well. She thought about it and felt relieved. In the car to Hengjian, Ying Jie looked at her and said gently, Why? Are you worried about Mu Yun? These few years, Ying Jie had watched Mu Yun grow up. She would visit the south when she was free. She didn't get married and had children, so Mu Yun was like her godson. Yi Liangqiu nodded and looked out of the car window. She said softly, Ying Jie, if it wasn't for Mu Yun, I don't think I would have come back. She liked the peace of the south, the place without Qin Anlan. If she could, she didn't want to face him again in this life. How could Sister Ying not know what she was thinking? She could only sigh in her heart and did not say much. Ying Jie, don't worry. I won't get hurt again. Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little low. I won't get hurt if I don't have expectations. Ying Jie felt sad for her. There was nothing wrong with Liangqiu, nor did she do anything wrong. She just fell in love with someone she shouldn't have. She pondered for a moment before saying, "There have been a lot of newcomers in the company recently. I think Pei Huan has potential, but he doesn't have the right intentions. It's hard for him to achieve anything." Ying Jie spoke with reservation. In her heart, she still believed that President Qin and Liangqiu still had hope. Therefore, she never mentioned anything about Qin Anlan. How could Yi Liangqiu not know that she wanted to do this? She had only been back in the company for a few days, but Mo Xiaoqi had already counted about a dozen newcomers in front of her. They were all the harem that Qin Anlan had doted on. In the end, Mo Xiaoqi said to her, "Yi Liangqiu, actually, we are no different. In President Qin's heart, we are all commodities, not women." Yeah, how could she not know that? She knew it better than anyone else. Yi Liangqiu thought about it and smiled. "Ying Jie, you don't have to hide it from me. Even if you don't tell me, someone else will." From the beginning to the end, only Kaim and Ying Jie knew about her and Qin Anlan. She knew Ying Jie's feelings, but some things were not missed, but simply impossible. Ying Jie didn't say much. She sighed and said, "You decide." Yi Liangqiu nodded and the two of them didn't talk anymore. When she arrived at Hengdian, the days of filming would be tough, especially since she had to deal with both sides. She didn't even admit what had happened and pretended not to know. Qin Anlan's voice was a little hoarse. "Do you want me to be with someone else that much?" This sentence more or less tugged at Yi Liangqiu's heartstrings. She held the phone and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, she said softly, "President Qin, I don't think we need to talk about such a personal topic." "I think so, too." Qin Anlan's voice became colder. "My relationship with Su Cheng is just like that. How it was in the past will be how it will be in the future." Was he explaining it to her? Yi Liangqiu's breathing was a little erratic and rapid. Chapter 1273. Yi Liangqiu's fingers slowly slid down the phone. After she put it down, she looked at Ying Jie and said, "He's angry." "Of course he's angry." Ying Jie smiled. "Then, let him be angry. This wouldn't change anything." Instead, it made President Qin worry about Liangqiu even more. Ying Jie did this as a test. Seeing how angry President Qin was, he probably didn't feel relieved. Yi Liangqiu closed the script and smiled. "I'm going out. It's my time." Ying Jie also went out with her. Although Yi Liangqiu didn't come from an acting school, she was very perceptive and looked good on camera. Director Zhong said that she was born to be fed by the ancestors. Director Zhong was very satisfied with the film seeing the stars. He said that Yi Liangqiu had shown the faithfulness of women in that period. Director Zhong was very confident in this film and was ready to use her to win various awards. The other commercial film was a warring period film, and Yi Liangqiu was definitely the female lead. The momentum was very good, especially since the owner was a big film company and the production was very big. Half a year later, it was Yi Liangqiu's time. Her two films swept the box office of the entire Chinese New Year period, and the two films combined exceeded 5 billion yuan. Moreover, Yi Liangqiu was crazily sought after at all the major film festivals, especially the media, who said that she was another superstar after Lin Qingxia. Yi Liangqiu was very busy. She was busy with all the major film festivals and was busy accepting endorsements. She had accepted more than 10 international endorsements, and for a while, she was in the limelight. Therefore, she could only see Qin Anlan once every 2 or 3 months. After a long time, she got used to it, and he seemed to have forgotten about her. He only remembered the heavenly Queen Yi, not Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu was busy for a while, and when she really had some free time, it was already 2 years later. In these 2 years, she had filmed 4 movies, and not a single TV show. She became the #1 celebrity with an annual income of 200 million. She had long passed the time when she needed to struggle. This year, Yi Liangqiu was 25 years old. Yi Muyun was 5 years old. That night was the end of the year for King Entertainment and their collaboration with ATV. Yi Liangqiu didn't want to attend at first. She just wanted to stay at home and accompany Mu Yun. She was worried that Mu Yun had not been feeling well for the past 2 days. However, Ying Jie later specially informed her to participate in this event, saying that she had to show her face no matter what. She reluctantly agreed. The evening gown she chose was a black V-neck. The front was considered conservative, but the back was almost completely exposed. It was very dazzling. Ying Jie wailed, "Do you have to do this?" She had never seen Liangqiu wear such a killer weapon. Yi Liangqiu smiled and looked at Ying Jie. "Didn't you say that I'm usually too conservative?" Ying Jie didn't say anything. The two of them arrived at the venue. When the black limousine came out, it caused a burst of screams. Every scream was called Yi Liangqiu's name. Yi Liangqiu! Yi Liangqiu! Yi Liangqiu gave them a slight signal, and they strangely calmed down. They turned to look at their idols in silence. Ying Jie smiled. "No wonder they call you hubby." Liangqiu's beauty was not only gentle, but also had a rare heroic spirit, but it was not masculine. When walking the red carpet, Yi Liangqiu and Ying Jie walked alone. She didn't need any male companions, because she alone was enough to support. Both sides of the red carpet were filled with reporters, their cameras aimed in this direction. Chapter 1274. Don't you look too plain? Other people can't wait to get a few more styles to impress you, Ying Jie whispered. Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little low. She smiled and said, "I don't need to impress anyone now." As she spoke, Sister Ying tilted her head and looked over. She was also stunned. The Yi Liangqiu today was not the Yi Liangqiu from 2 years ago, nor was she the little girl from 6 years ago. Yi Liangqiu held Ying Jie's hand. "I just need to hold Ying Jie's hand." For a moment, Ying Jie was very touched. "You bad girl." Ying Jie's voice was unsteady. "You always make me sad." Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. "I thought you would be happier now." Ying Jie sighed. "Yes. I am happy." The little girl she had brought up was unparalleled now. She was a well-deserved diva. Ying Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu and wanted to say something but stopped. There were some things she wanted to tell Liangqiu, but she didn't know how to say it. After hesitating for a long time, she still couldn't say it. In the end, she thought it was better to let President Qin tell her. When the two were about to enter the hotel, there was a commotion on the red carpet. Yi Liangqiu looked sideways and saw Su Cheng and Qin Anlan. They had been together for the past 2 years. Yi Liangqiu heard that Su Cheng was the daughter-in-law of Qin Anlan's mother, so it was not strange that they were together. She didn't look at them and walked into the hall. She took a glass of whiskey from the waiter and drank half of it. Ying Jie reminded her in a low voice, "Don't get drunk now. If you lose your composure, the reporters will write nonsense." Ying Jie sighed in her heart. Liangqiu didn't seem to care, but she had never let it go. If she had let it go, she wouldn't have drunk such strong alcohol. Usually, no matter what the occasion was, she was always cautious and never touched such things. When Yi Liangqiu heard this, she looked down at the wine in her glass and said in a low voice, "Help me back later." Ying Jie glared at her. "If you're dead drunk, I'll just leave you here. I won't care about you." Although she said that, her heart softened, and her voice became much gentler. "Do you still want to go home? Will Mu Yun see it right away?" Yi Liangqiu knew that she had nowhere to hide in front of Big Sister Ying. She was just about to speak when a melodious and sweet voice resounded by her ears. "Big Sister Liangqiu, what are the two of you talking about?" Yi Liangqiu and Ying Jie were both stunned. They turned around and saw Qin Anlan and the little princess of ATV, Su Cheng, standing behind them. Their backs were covered in cold sweat. How much did Qin Anlan hear just now? Su Cheng's eyes flashed with a sly look. She smiled and said, "I have something to talk to Sister Liangqiu." "Sister Liangqiu, I think you are free, okay?" Yi Liangqiu saw a hint of threat in her eyes. She had no choice but to follow Su Cheng to a corner. Ying Jie looked at her boss and asked unhappily, "President Qin, aren't you afraid that Liangqiu will bully your little girlfriend?" Su Cheng is not my little girlfriend. Qin Anlan frowned. Ying Jie said with a smile, I know. President Qin likes President Tang's wife now, how immoral. Qin Anlan's face darkened. How dare you say that? It's true. Ying Jie said sarcastically, however, President Tang's little wife seems to have a similar temperament to our Liangqiu. Chapter 1275. This was her most obvious hint. President Qin clearly liked Yi Liangqiu, but he didn't know it himself. Qin Anlan looked at Ying Jie, pursed his lips and said unhappily, don't talk about it casually. Ying Jie smiled. Was she not allowed to talk about Liangqiu or President Tang's wife, Pei Chichi? On the other side, Su Cheng and Yi Liangqiu stood side by side. Su Cheng took the wine glass from the waiter's hand and handed it to Yi Liangqiu. Sister Liangqiu, you don't look happy. Yi Liangqiu took the glass from her hand, but didn't drink it. She just held it. Su Cheng smiled. Why? Are you afraid that I've drugged it? She smiled sweetly and looked like a little angel, but Yi Liangqiu knew that there was an evil soul in Su Cheng's heart. 2 years had passed, and Su Cheng hadn't done anything to her. She didn't even mention the existence of Mu Yun. She didn't understand. She didn't understand what Su Cheng was thinking. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng and smiled. Why would I? But she still didn't drink it. If she fell for such a little provocation, then she would have wasted the past few years. If there was one person in this world that she was extremely wary of, it would be Su Cheng. After Su Cheng entered the entertainment industry, Yi Liangqiu thought that she would compete with her, but it seemed that she didn't. Su Cheng seemed to like to hype up her and Qin Anlan scandals, and every time she did, she would bring Yi Liangqiu to the headlines. The three of them seemed to be tied together. As time passed, Yi Liangqiu should have let down her guard, but she didn't. Instead, she felt that Su Cheng was a mystery. She felt that what Su Cheng really wanted was her, Yi Liangqiu. She knew that in the past 2 years, Su Cheng had gone to look for Mu Yun. When Aunt Zhong took Mu Yun out, she went to play with Mu Yun and brought him toys. Mu Yun told her everything. Yi Liangqiu could not see through Su Cheng at all. At this time, she looked at Su Cheng through the crystal cup and said in a low voice, Su Cheng, it's been 2 years. Are you done playing games? Su Cheng still smiled sweetly. Sister Liangqiu, are you impatient now? Don't play tricks with me. Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little cold. I'm not interested in playing these childish games with you. If you want to play, you can go to Qin Anlan. At the mention of Qin Anlan, Su Cheng smiled a little playfully. She tilted her head and looked at Yi Liangqiu. Sister Liangqiu, don't you love him the most? Aren't you afraid that I will hurt him? If you can hurt him, go ahead. Yi Liangqiu's voice became colder. It has nothing to do with me. Oh, what if I sleep with him? Su Cheng smiled sweetly. Sister Liangqiu, don't you care? Yi Liangqiu's eyes fell on Su Cheng's wine cup. Her wine cup reflected a slender figure, a figure that made her suffocate. Yi Liangqiu also smiled softly. She tilted her head and looked at Su Cheng. It doesn't matter. I don't care. Really? There was a low and hoarse voice behind her. It was Qin Anlan. Su Cheng immediately smiled sweetly and held Qin Anlan's arm with both hands. Anlan Ge. Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu, but he said to Su Cheng, your father has arrived. Go and say hello. Chapter 1276. A smile appeared on Yi Liangqiu's face. What a little girl's trick. After Su Cheng left, Yi Liangqiu looked at the glass in her hand and suddenly tilted her head to drink it. The spicy wine slid down her throat, and the throb made her tremble. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Is that so? It doesn't matter who I sleep with. Yi Liangqiu put down the glass and leaned against the sofa lazily. She looked at Qin Anlan and smiled. Qin Anlan, won't you sleep if it matters? She was starting to feel dizzy. There were 2 of him, 4 of him. So many of him. She groped for the sofa and sat down, but it felt like she was sitting on a boat. She felt seasick. Her fingers dug into the back of the sofa. She wiped her red lips and gently said a long list of names. Qin Anlan's expression changed slightly. He leaned forward and looked into her eyes. Isn't it unrelated? Why do you remember it so clearly? Yi Liangqiu's skin was porcelain white. Looking closely, he realized that she had only put on some honey powder. Her skin was smooth and translucent. She opened her eyes. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and when she blinked, they seemed to be overflowing with colors. At this moment, she was devastatingly beautiful. At this moment, she was like an exquisite work of art. Qin Anlan's eyes were locked on her face. After a long time, he said, "Are you drunk?" She smiled lightly. Her hand was on the armrest of the sofa, and her heart was heaving up and down. She looked at Qin Anlan and leaned close to his ear. She said in a low voice, "It was Su Cheng who gave me the wine." Qin Anlan's eyes were cold. He grabbed her arm and said coldly, "Come with me." Her body was very hot, and he was shocked. "I don't want to go with you." She smiled lightly, and there was a touch of coldness on her face. Qin Anlan pursed his lips and forcefully grabbed her wrist and pulled her up. He passed through the bustling hall, everyone, and Su Cheng, who had a confused expression on her face. Su Cheng looked at Yi Liangqiu's strange look and was shocked. There was nothing wrong with that glass of wine. It was just a little strong. Even if he drank a cup, he wouldn't lose his composure like this. How could this be? When Qin Anlan passed by Su Cheng, he glared at her and restrained himself from saying goodbye to Mr. Su. At this moment, there was only Yi Liangqiu in his heart. He was afraid that she would lose her composure and cause a scandal. Yi Liangqiu was half hugged and half carried by him as they walked out. When they passed by Su Cheng, she winked at her. She also knew how to play little tricks. At that moment, Su Cheng's expression turned ugly. She narrowed her eyes and looked in the direction where they had left. What would they do? What would Qin Anlan do to Yi Liangqiu? No, no, no. Su Cheng's eyes showed a touch of viciousness. How could he do that? That was hers, and no one was allowed to touch it. She had made a mistake once before, and they had a child. But she couldn't do it again. Qin Anlan helped Yi Liangqiu into the car. She was lying on her side in the back seat, and she seemed to be asleep. The white evening dress covered the back seat, and there was a kind of stunning beauty. Qin Anlan paused and looked at her deeply. After a while, he closed the car door and sat in the front seat. He called Ying Jie to tell her that he had taken her away. Before Ying Jie could react, he had already hung up the phone. The car window rolled down slowly. He opened the rearview mirror, and the scene in the back seat was reflected. After looking at it for a while, he pursed his lips and started the car. Chapter 1277. When he opened the car door, she was still lying there, covered in sweat. Qin Anlan picked her up. Her hair had already spread out and reached her waist, contrasting with her white dress. In such a dark night, it was as if he was carrying a long-haired princess. Every step he took seemed to be followed by countless magic fairies. As soon as he moved, she woke up. She slowly opened her eyes, and there was a hint of desire in her beautiful and enchanting eyes. That expression made Qin Anlan tremble. He did not know how long it had been since he had such an urge. Making love to a woman seemed to be a process. It was not something he wanted, but it was to relieve his boredom. But she was so beautiful that he had the urge to fiercely kiss her lips, to fiercely take her. He did not even know why he had brought her back. It was obvious that it was the best choice to leave her with Ying Jie. Perhaps it was because she was too beautiful at the moment. He would not feel at ease even if he were to leave her with someone of the same gender. In the elevator, she began to feel restless. Her slender arms hung around his neck, and she called him Anlan softly. "Are you okay?" His voice was extremely hoarse. Yi Liangqiu bit her lips. She bit her lips lightly, and it was as if she could bleed. Her red lips were tempting to taste. Hot, uncomfortable. Her little hands hugged him tightly, and her face was nestled against his neck. She was like a little bird rubbing against an old bird. At this moment, she was as soft as cotton and very light. She was very tall, but in his arms, she felt very small. In fact, He could remember that she was indeed very small. Especially when he wanted her, he also felt a little pain. Qin Anlan pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes. He looked at her, and his heart was in a dilemma. She was very uncomfortable, and so was he. Could they be together so that it would not be so uncomfortable? He did not know who kissed who first. They kissed passionately in the elevator. There was not a single gap between their lips and tongues. It was the same for their bodies. They hugged each other and stumbled against the wall of the elevator. It was so violent that the elevator shook a little, but neither of them could care less. Qin Anlan kissed her greedily. The wonderful taste made him reluctant to let go. His big palm moved up her waist, stirring up a wave of heat. Qin Anlan. She called out his name softly and raised her head to receive his overly passionate kiss. He followed her soft skin, from her neck to her lips. Her hands were raised above her head, and her body was firmly pressed against him. Separated by a layer of clothes, he began to do the most embarrassing thing. Even if she didn't drink any aphrodisiac, the wine was enough to arouse her. Perhaps, what moved her was the man in front of her. Yi Liangqiu realized that she had gone too far. She had only wanted to frustrate Su Cheng, but now it seemed that it was difficult for her to extricate herself. He rubbed against her bit by bit, so he could naturally feel the changes in her. At this time, the elevator door opened. Ding! There was also someone outside. Yi Liangqiu subconsciously buried her face in his neck. The person outside happened to be playing with his phone. When he saw Yi Liangqiu, he recognized him and quickly took a picture. Qin Anlan's thin lips were tightly pressed together. He wanted to step out, but the elevator door had closed. That person did not come up. Did he take a picture? Yi Liangqiu looked up and asked softly. Qin Anlan did not say a word. He just held her little face and kissed her forcefully. Once they reached the apartment, he held her shoulders and kissed her without restraint. Chapter 1278. Their bodies hugged each other as they stumbled to the sofa. Qin Anlan looked at her beauty from above. His gaze was almost worshipping. Her rare beauty had faded over time. At this moment, there was poison under his body. Little by little, he kissed her brows, her eyes, her lips, her little neck. He was unbelievably gentle. Yi Liangqiu received his gentleness, but not his heart. Fortunately, she didn't put her heart on him. Otherwise, wouldn't she be heartbroken again? She chuckled and lifted her neck. Her voice was trembling as she said, Qin Anlan, itchy. He continued kissing her. Every time he kissed a spot, he would ask her in a husky voice, "Is it itchy here?" He was probably too passionate and forgot himself. He had done things to her that he had never done to a woman before. Only God knew that he never served women. Yi Liangqiu raised her head. From where he was looking, her body was extremely beautiful. It was extremely similar to the layers of the most beautiful mountain peaks. Her body suddenly went limp and she panted. Qin Anlan, enough. Her eyes were a little wet as she looked at his passionate look. So this was how Qin Anlan looked when he was desperate. He didn't seem to hear her and continued kissing her without a care. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and smiled lightly. Qin Anlan, I'm serious. She sat up slightly and looked at his eyes. She looked clear. I don't want it. She didn't want it, but he wanted it. When a man was teased to this extent, asking him to stop was tantamount to killing him. Especially when he was facing such a beautiful woman. Qin Anlan looked up and supported himself with his arms. He moved forward and kissed her lips fiercely. His voice was swallowed by his teeth. Be good, don't move. She kicked him and was held down by him forcefully. Yi Liangqiu, I can't stop. His dark eyes were locked on her beauty. Her gown was half off, and she looked like Venus. Only, she wasn't incomplete, she was perfect. Qin Anlan held his belt with one hand and locked her hand with the other, forcing her to undo his own. Aren't you afraid that I'll pester you? Actually, she didn't care. She didn't love him anymore. So what if they had sex? It was just a one-night stand. Qin Anlan lowered his body to kiss her. Then wrap your body around me first. His heart was clear now, and he even felt that this was pretty good. If she said she wanted him to marry her, then he would marry her. He was like a hot knife through butter. She was powerless to resist. In the end, she could only press her lips against his and whisper, "Go to the bedroom." Qin Anlan carried her into the master bedroom and threw her onto the bed. He untied his tie and his shirt fell to the ground. She picked up the photo frame from the bedside table and stroked it gently with her fingers. She looked up and said, "Qin Anlan, have you forgotten about our safety zone?" Chapter 1279. She might not believe it if he said it out loud, but there had never been anything between him and Su Cheng. There was nothing in his heart. Besides, Qin Anlan had never felt that Su Cheng was interested in him. From the beginning to the end, the person who was the most enthusiastic about their relationship was probably his mother. He didn't want to get married, but with Su Cheng as a barrier, he was happy to do it. He felt that he was waiting for someone. That person wasn't Shen Lian, he thought it was Pei Chichi. Therefore, he had always been single. He also thought that he would not be interested in women other than Pei Chichi in the future because he had not been looking for a woman recently. However, he had overestimated himself. He had wanted Yi Liangqiu like a madman. He had completely forgotten about Pei Chichi's existence. Smoking, he looked at her and said, "Sleep here for the night." Just like in the past, the two of them lived together peacefully. Yi Liangqiu looked at him quietly. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "I want to go home." "Home?" He smiled faintly. "This used to be your home. Have you forgotten?" She looked up at him. After a long time, she smiled lightly and said, "Don't you think it's ironic?" This place had never been her home. She was just a passerby. This house was hers, and so was Qin Anlan's. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at her. After a long time, Qin Anlan said, "I'll send you to the office tomorrow." She wanted to say something, but Qin Anlan had already made up his mind. He walked into the bathroom and took a shower. Yi Liangqiu leaned against the headboard. Her gaze fell on the photo frame for a long time. At this moment, she even needed a cigarette. But she didn't smoke. She had Mu Yun. No matter how distressed she was, she wouldn't touch cigarettes or alcohol to relieve her stress. Looking around, the place was still the same as before. The decorations were cold and hard, without a hint of femininity. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. As Yi Liangqiu was thinking, the phone in her handbag rang. She took it out and looked at it. It was Aunt Zhong. Aunt Zhong's voice was a little anxious. "Miss Yi, come back quickly. Mu Yun fell and his head is a little broken. Is there a lot of blood?" Yi Liangqiu had already stood up and casually pulled her clothes. Her voice was even more anxious than Auntie Zhong's. Aunt Zhong hesitated for a moment. "No. I called Dr. Lin to come over." Yi Liangqiu walked outside and said, "Observe for a while longer. If it doesn't work, inform those two." Those two people were Mu Yun's blood bank. Aunt Zhong nodded. Yi Liangqiu had already reached the door. She placed her hand on the doorknob and pulled the door open. At this moment, there was only Mu Yun in her heart, nothing else. Even Qin Anlan was not affected at all. His voice rang out from behind her, "It's already so late. Are you going back dressed like this?" She paused and turned around slowly. He was wearing a white bathrobe, just like how she had seen him before. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. "Then lend me a car." He looked at her and frowned slightly. Then he looked at her and asked, "There's a man?" "Yes." She did not deny it. Instead, she admitted it. Qin Anlan stared at her for a long time. Finally, he took out a car key and handed it to her. "The one I drove just now." Yi Liangqiu took it, thanked him softly, and then walked out quickly. Chapter 1280. He couldn't help but recall the time when he had hugged her. At that time, she had been lying in his car, dazzlingly beautiful and infinitely luxurious. Qin Anlan pursed his lips. Suddenly, a strange feeling arose in his heart. He suddenly felt that there was something wrong with her just now. He went out in his bathrobe and went straight to the underground car park. But when he reached the underground car park, Yi Liangqiu's car had already started and was driving towards the exit. He ran a few steps and the car had already left. Qin Anlan stood where he had been, his expression a little ugly and his gaze was even more distant. He had to admit that he had been played by her tonight. As for the reason, it was probably partly because of Su Cheng, and partly because Yi Liangqiu still hated him. He looked at her for a long time, and finally, he slowly walked back. Tonight, he was accompanied by a glass of red wine and a sleepless night. He didn't know how long it had been since he had a good sleep. The last time seemed to be 5 or 6 years ago. At that time, Yi Liangqiu was still here. He smiled bitterly. His phone rang. He reached out to take it. It was a call from Su Cheng. "Why are you calling me at this hour?" Qin Anlan's tone was a little indifferent. Su Cheng's voice was very delicate. "Anlan Ji, how are you and Sister Liangqiu?" Qin Anlan's tone was a little indifferent. "She's gone. I thought that Anlan Ji liked her very much." Su Cheng's voice had always been delicate and unguarded. Qin Anlan had always treated her like a sister. Except for the incident with Yi Zun, she had done nothing wrong. He had asked Su Cheng about the incident with Yi Zun, and Su Cheng had managed to fool him. He didn't pursue the matter, because if Yi Liangqiu wanted to do something, she would have had the opportunity and the ability to fight against Su Cheng. But after so many years, they still lived in harmony. She is King Entertainment, or rather, the most popular female celebrity in Asia. Cheng, don't mess around." Qin Anlan's voice was slightly cold, a warning. Su Cheng smiled lightly. "Of course I won't mess around. You're the person Anlan Ji likes." Qin Anlan listened to her words and felt that it was a little weird, but he couldn't tell what was weird about it. Su Cheng stuck out her tongue and said briskly over the phone, "Anlan Ji, tonight's program was really good. It's a pity that you went back early." Qin Anlan smiled faintly. The programs in the past years are similar. Su Cheng didn't say anything more and hung up the phone. She looked at the phone in her hand and smiled playfully. It seemed that nothing had happened between them. It wasn't Anlan Ji who wasn't willing, but Yi Liangqiu. Thinking of Yi Liangqiu, Su Cheng looked at the phone again. That phone call was just a little insurance. 10 p.m. Yi Liangqiu rushed back to the villa. Dr. Lin had already arrived and checked on him. He said that Mu Yun had only bumped into himself lightly and there were no wounds. It would be fine. She heaved a sigh of relief and sent Dr. Lin out. Dr. Lin's white sports car stopped at the entrance and she walked out with him. She didn't know how beautiful she looked in her white gown, especially when she walked across the lawn. Under the moonlight, she looked like a moon goddess. Dr. Lin had known her for several years. He had seen her grow from a young girl in her 20s to a beautiful 25-year-old. Chapter 1281. Dr. Lin was a little moved and his heart pounded. His heart, which had never pounded for a woman, pounded violently. He knew that it was a feeling of love. However, it was unlikely that they would have the chance to be together. Dr. Lin knew that they belonged to two different worlds. However, as a man, he still admired her at this moment. After opening the car door, he suddenly turned around and looked at her with a burning gaze. "Liangqiu, my suggestion is still the same. Find the child's father and have another child. The stem cell transplant will save Mu Yun from so much pain, and he won't have to bear unknown risks." Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and said after a long while, "I'll think of a way." Actually, she didn't want to beg Qin Anlan, and she didn't want to let herself and Mu Yun become so miserable. She didn't want to see Qin Anlan be shocked or even suspicious when he found out about Mu Yun's existence. At that time, her once love, become so humble, become so insignificant. Dr. Lin was silent for a while. Because Mu Yun's blood type is special, others can't do anything about it. Perhaps, if it wasn't for this reason, he would have more courage. Yi Liangqiu looked at Dr. Lin for a long time before the corners of her lips twitched slightly. She looked up at the boundless moon. How long had it been since she could relax properly? Dr. Lin didn't say anything else, so he got into the car and drove away. Yi Liangqiu didn't feel nothing. Dr. Lin liked her, and he had liked her for many years. Dr. Lin had been by her side since she was 20 years old. At that time, Dr. Lin was 25 years old and had just graduated from medical school. Now, he was 30 years old. A man's best years. She wanted to talk to him if necessary, so that he didn't have to wait for her. She didn't have any expectations for love. She had given her love to the most honorable and most ruthless man in the world. She had given up everything for a little warmth, but he didn't want it. Yes, Qin Anlan knew that she liked him from the beginning. Yi Liangqiu stood in the dark for a long time. When she returned to the villa, it was already half an hour later. She changed her clothes and went to see Mu Yun. Mu Yun fell asleep while Aunt Zhong was taking care of him. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, "I'll take care of him tonight." Aunt Zhong's voice was very uneasy. "Miss Yi, I didn't mean to disturb you. Mu Yun is fine. What if he disturbs Miss Yi's career?" Yi Liangqiu's salary was 20,000 yuan a month, which was impossible to get in other families. Aunt Zhong also attached great importance to this job. "It's fine. Mu Yun's matter is the most important." Yi Liangqiu's tone was calm, without the slightest displeasure. Aunt Zhong breathed a sigh of relief. "Yes, I was scared out of my wits. I'll be more careful in the future." After Auntie Zhong left, Yi Liangqiu sat there and looked in the direction Auntie Zhong had left. Aunt Zhong was a cautious person and would never make such a mistake. She didn't say it because she had never hurt Mu Yun. It was easy to imagine who was the one who did this. Yi Liangqiu lay down, turned her body sideways, and looked at Mu Yun's little face. Dr. Lin's words flashed in her mind. She was a little hesitant, even considering. Mu Yun bled from time to time, and she would be worried and heartbroken. The next afternoon, at the entrance of the ATV, Su Cheng walked out of the building and waited for her assistant to drive the car over. Chapter 1282. At this moment, a white Bentley came to a stop in front of her. The car window wound down and Yi Liangqiu was sitting in the driver's seat. She wore a pair of black sunglasses and her expression was cold. "Get in the car." Su Cheng smiled faintly, bent over and waved at her. "Sister Liangqiu." Yi Liangqiu felt that Su Cheng was a bit of an idiot. They had a grudge against each other. Just because she did not lay a hand on Su Cheng did not mean that she had forgotten about it. But Su Cheng could still smile and call her sister Liangqiu when she looked at her. Su Cheng got into the car and fastened her seatbelt. Her tone was even sweeter. "Sister Liangqiu, where are we going?" "To a place where there's no one." Yi Liangqiu's tone was very calm. "There, you can kill me, and I'll kill you. No one will know." For a long time, Su Cheng did not reply to her. Yi Liangqiu sneered. "Are you afraid?" Su Cheng tilted her head and smiled. "Why would I?" She leaned over. "I really want to see how Sister Liangqiu looks like when you kill someone." Yi Liangqiu's pupils contracted. At that moment, she really wanted to kill Su Cheng. She would never forget Yi Zun's death. As she drove, Su Cheng played with her delicate fingernails playfully. She blew at them. "Sister Liangqiu, some things are not as simple as they seem. This world is far dirtier than you think. Like what's behind your innocent smile?" Yi Liangqiu's voice was very cold. Su Cheng giggled. "For Mu Yun." She looked indifferent and didn't care that Yi Liangqiu knew that Aunt Zhong had been bribed. She smiled gently. "Sister Liangqiu, think about it. Aunt Zhong has been bribed by me. It's easy for me to do anything to Mu Yun. Su Cheng, Qin Anlan, and I have no present or future. Don't pester me anymore." Yi Liangqiu's fingers clenched the steering wheel. Su Cheng was in a very good mood. She looked at her and said, "Sister Liangqiu, I've told you before that I just want to play with you." "Really?" Yi Liangqiu stepped on the accelerator and the car quickly drove in the direction of the sea. This was an uninhabited beach. As far as the eye could see, there was only boundless seawater and sand. There was an endless sea of water and sand. There was no one there. Su Cheng looked at her of the beach of the beach. Su Cheng looked at her suspiciously, but she still got out of the car. The door on her side was closed, and then the sports car started again. The sound of the tires rubbing against the sand was frightening. Su Cheng was stunned and quickly turned around. The white Bentley crashed into her. She screamed and ran forward, but the beach was uneven, and she couldn't run fast. This Bentley could accelerate to 200 kilometers per hour in 5 seconds. There was no way Su Cheng could outrun it. She didn't expect that Yi Liangqiu would do this. She actually wanted to kill herself. Su Cheng screamed and ran with all her might. She had never been so embarrassed before. She was the little princess of ATV. No one had ever dared to treat her like this. Wherever she ran, Yi Liangqiu's car followed. Slowly, she was approached by the sea, her body fell into the water, and she got up and ran again. Her mouth was filled with a lot of seawater, and her body was covered with mud. The original color of her white dress could no longer be seen. Su Cheng cried. She sat in the water with her hands behind her back and kept moving backward. Yi Liangqiu held the steering wheel, stepped on the accelerator, and crazily crashed into Su Cheng. Chapter 1283. Su Cheng kept stepping back and fell to the ground. Her clothes were wet by the seawater, and her hair was covered with sand. She looked indescribably embarrassed. But at this time, she couldn't care about it. At this time, she just wanted to live. She stood up again and ran forward crazily. She kept murmuring in her heart, "She's crazy. She's crazy." The car behind her seemed to touch her leg, but the car just followed her and didn't kill her immediately. The feeling of being so close to death made her suffocate. There was fear in Su Cheng's eyes. She fell to the ground. When she came to her senses, her eyes were wide open. Yi Liangqiu sat in the car and clenched the steering wheel with her fingers. Her voice was a little cold. "This car belongs to Qin Anlan." Su Cheng's body trembled. She instantly understood what Yi Liangqiu meant. "I didn't do anything to Mu Yun." Her voice was trembling. Yi Liangqiu finally turned off the engine. When the sound of the car engine stopped, Su Cheng's whole body became weak and collapsed. She also found that she peed her pants. Fortunately, her body was wet, so it couldn't be seen. But the heat made her feel ashamed and annoyed. She watched Yi Liangqiu walking towards her step by step, like a goddess of vengeance. Su Cheng's eyes were a little hot. Her beautiful little mouth was tightly pursed, and she stared at Liangqiu, who was scared. Finally, Yi Liangqiu walked in front of her, raised her hand, and slapped her. Su Cheng's face was turned to one side, and there were a few finger marks on her white face. "If you had done anything to him, I would have killed you just now." Yi Liangqiu's voice was cold. "Don't think that I have forgotten what happened to Yi Zun. Su Cheng, this world is not something you can play with." Su Cheng raised her eyes. There was a touch of hurt and mockery in her eyes. "You hit me for Yi Zun?" "Yes." Yi Liangqiu squatted down and stared at Su Cheng. "If I could, I would really like to kill you with my own hands to avenge Yi Zun." Su Cheng laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. "Sister Liangqiu, this is a big joke." She raised her delicate and embarrassed face. "Well, I'll wait for you. Come and avenge Yi Zun." There was a touch of madness and desperation in Su Cheng's eyes. Yi Liangqiu narrowed his eyes and grabbed her neck. "Do you think I don't dare? Sister Liangqiu Yi." "I Liangqiu." Su Cheng smiled, and Su Cheng smiled. "I Liangqiu." Yi Liangqiu suddenly let go of her, turned to get in the car, and started it. At this time, Su Cheng was still able to get up and sat next to her. "Sister Liangqiu, you have to take me back." Yi Liangqiu's voice was full of patience. "Su Cheng, you peed your pants. Don't think that I don't know." Su Cheng's expression froze, and she stared at Yi Liangqiu. "Sister Liangqiu, you know?" Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes, and after a while, she looked at Su Cheng and asked seriously, "Su Cheng, do you want to go to the mental hospital to have a check? I wanted to kill you just now, but you can still call me Sister Liangqiu. I don't have any IQ." Su Cheng's voice was very soft, and her face was innocent. Coupled with her embarrassment, she looked very pitiful. "I know that Sister Liangqiu wouldn't hit me. She just wanted to scare me, right?" Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng. and she really couldn't get angry. Go to the sea and wash yourself clean before coming back up. Her voice was still cold. Chapter 1284. Su Cheng was very obedient. She opened the door and got out of the car. Then, she went to the deeper part of the sea, took off the panties under her skirt and threw them away. Then, she washed her face and prepared to get into the car. But when she looked up, she was dumbfounded. Where's the car? Where's the car? The white Bentley had already driven a few hundred meters away. She couldn't catch up with it even if she flew. Su Cheng followed behind and ran hard. Sister Liangqiu, wait for me. However, the car was getting further and further away, leaving only a small white dot. What the hell? Su Cheng frowned. She kicked the seawater and sat down angrily. She forgot that she didn't have panties. She didn't know what to say when she sat down. She suddenly jumped up, and there was a piece of seafood on her butt. Then, Su Cheng cried. With tears in her eyes, she screamed in pain. The little princess of the ATV was thrown into the sea just like that. She pulled twice, but the seafood refused to let go. So, the little princess of the ATV walked towards the shore with the seafood on her butt. She cried as she walked. After walking for 2 hours, it was getting dark, and they had only walked about 2 kilometers. A white Bentley stopped by the side of the road. At that moment, Su Cheng felt as if she had seen a family member. With tears in her eyes, she opened the door and got into the car. Then, she raised her butt. Sister Liangqiu, the fair. Yi Liangqiu looked at the little crab. The little guy was still holding the tender meat tightly. She took the little crab down expressionlessly and carefully put it into the glove compartment. Mu Yun should like this. Su Cheng kept screaming in pain. Sister Bingqiu, be gentle. It hurts. Yi Liangqiu gave her a tissue. Stop the bleeding. She frowned again. It's the same. Su Cheng, you'd better get it checked. It's not good to have semen. Su Cheng sat down and felt a burning sensation all over her body. She forced out a sweet smile and said, Sister Liangqiu, I don't have any semen. I think I'm just right. I'm quite cute. Yi Liangqiu was disgusted. It seemed that Su Cheng was only 1 year younger than her, but she was still a giant baby. Without another word, she drove Su Cheng home. When they arrived at the Su residence, Su Cheng didn't get out of the car immediately. Instead, she pointed at the house and said sweetly, Sister Liangqiu, I live here. Do you want to come in and sit? Her face was innocent and pure, but Yi Liangqiu couldn't stand it. She coldly said, no need. At this time, night had fallen, and the Su residence was illuminated by the lights. It was resplendent and magnificent. Just by looking from the outside, one could imagine the prosperity inside. Her rejection made Su Cheng look a little disappointed. After a while, she softly said, then I'll go back first. Sister Liangqiu, goodbye. Su Cheng's butt was hurt by the seafood. Her walking posture was a little weird, but it was also inexplicably funny. How could Yi Liangqiu not know that she had been pretending to be cute in front of her? In fact, she had planned to take revenge on Su Cheng for Yi Zun. But as time went by, the hatred was not so strong. Su Cheng would often appear in front of her and play dumb. She didn't show any malice. Even when she hit or scolded her, she didn't fight back. She was like a little wife. Yi Liangqiu didn't know what to do with her. Maybe this was the best thing about Su Cheng. Yi Liangqiu sat in the car and looked at the black carved door of the Su residence. Suddenly, she felt a sense of familiarity. Cheng Cheng. Mom is here. Chapter 1285. A loving voice rang beside her ears. However, there was no one around. Yi Liangqiu covered his ears, blocking out the sound that came from an unknown place. She did not know what was wrong with her. All she knew was that she was afraid of this voice. She raised her eyes again and looked at the mansion in the twilight. It was like a monster. A voice in her heart had returned. Was this her old home? Yi Liangqiu was stunned. She got out of the car and ran to the cherry tree in front of the gate. There was a box buried there. She instinctively knew that it was there. She took the tools from the car and dug with all her might and determination. She dug until she found a metal box. Brushing away the moist soil on it, she sat down and opened it gently. There were 2 pieces of paper inside. One of them had Su Cheng's name written on it. The other one had Qin Anlan's name written on it. Her hands began to tremble. Su Cheng, Qin Anlan, they had grown up together. Cheng Cheng, Cheng Cheng, someone was calling her name again. She gasped for air. Everything was white in front of her. She could not see anything clearly. A gentle voice rang out. "Miss, what's wrong?" That voice pulled her back to reality. Yi Liangqiu snapped out of her trance and looked at the person who looked like a rich lady. She recognized that it was Mrs. Su. Mrs. Su was a very loving woman. She looked at Yi Liangqiu and recognized her as well. Her expression was indifferent. "Oh, it's Miss Yi." She could not be blamed for not liking Yi Liangqiu. She was happy with the marriage between Su Cheng and Qin Anlan. However, the newspapers were always reporting about the affairs between Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu. Naturally, she would not like it. Yi Liangqiu's gaze was locked on Mrs. Su's face. After a while, she said softly, "Yes." She got up with the box and walked towards her car. Mrs. Su then realized that she had dug a hole under the tree in front of her house, and Yi Liangqiu's car looked familiar. Later, she remembered that it was Anlan's car. It seemed that the relationship between them was not clean. Mrs. Su instinctively disliked it, but this was for the sake of her daughter. Cheng Cheng liked Anlan and would always call him Anlan Ge. At present, this woman before her was Cheng Cheng's love rival. Naturally, she would not hold back. Mrs. Su stopped Yi Liangqiu. Her tone was polite but a bit sharp. "Miss Yi." Yi Liangqiu turned around and looked at Mrs. Su. In front of her, there was another burst of white mist, and she couldn't see anything clearly. Mrs. Su's voice continued. "Cheng Cheng and Anlan have a very good relationship. Miss Yi is also a famous person. I believe she would not do anything to harm her reputation, right?" Yi Liangqiu finally got a good look at Mrs. Su and felt that she was a stranger. She smiled faintly and said, "President Qin seems to be single. And these words shouldn't be said by Mrs. Su to me." After saying that, she turned around and got into the car. She did not have the courage to look at Mrs. Su again. Her heart was filled with sadness. She didn't want to think about what was behind it. She instinctively wanted to escape. Seeing her leave, Mrs. Su only thought that Yi Liangqiu was feeling guilty. Elegantly returning to her car, Mrs. Su's voice was soft. "Drive in." The driver drove the car into the Su mansion. As soon as Mrs. Su got out of the car, Su Cheng, who had already changed her clothes, rushed over and said in a soft voice, "Mom, you came back from playing cards?" Mrs. Su looked down at her little daughter and said, "Where's your dad?" "Dad has come back. He is playing chess with Anlan Ge in the study." Su Cheng stuck out her tongue. Chapter 1286. Normally, Mrs. Su would feel relieved. However, her face was not looking too good. She pulled Su Cheng over and reprimanded her. "Cheng Cheng, how was your relationship with Anlan?" Su Cheng's gaze froze. She then looked at Mrs. Su cautiously. "Mom, why do you ask?" Mrs. Su's voice sounded displeased. "Speak properly to Mom." Su Cheng blushed. "It was pretty good. Isn't Anlan Ge in our house?" Mrs. Su's face turned serious. "When he came to our house, I thought he was in a relationship with your dad. Since he came to our house, did he even say a few words to you? At most, he just touched your head. Did Cheng Cheng eat?" After a pause, Mrs. Su continued. "Even now, he hasn't entered your room, right?" Su Cheng lowered her head. "Mom," Mrs. Su looked at her with a look of disappointment. "Just now, I saw Yi Liangqiu outside. She chased him all the way here. Cheng Cheng, if you don't take action, your Anlan Ge will belong to someone else." Su Cheng looked at Mrs. Su and asked slowly, "Mom, you saw her?" "Yes. She looks even better than in the movies. However, she doesn't seem to be in a good mood. Mrs. Su thought about it and pinched Su Cheng. Be more careful. Otherwise, your boyfriend will be snatched away. Su Cheng fell into deep thought. Mrs. Su looked upstairs and mysteriously took out a bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. She placed it in Su Cheng's hand. This wine is very strong and has a strong kick. Pour a glass for Anlan later. There was a strong hint in her words. It was impossible for Su Cheng not to understand. She looked at her mother hesitantly. At that moment, Su Shixian and Qin Anlan came down from upstairs. Mr. Su smiled. What are you two talking about? Mrs. Su smiled. Cheng Cheng just came back. I was just asking her. As he spoke, he motioned for Su Cheng to bring the wine over and poured a glass for Qin Anlan and Mr. Su respectively. Cheng Cheng, why aren't you drinking? Mrs. Su asked with a smile. Su Cheng stuck out her tongue. It's not convenient for me. This child. Mrs. Su ignored her and talked to Qin Anlan. After this meal, Qin Anlan drank some wine, so naturally, his whole body was heated up. When they arrived at Su Cheng's room, Mrs. Su winked at her. Su Cheng took it, closed the door, and helped him to the bed. Qin Anlan fell heavily to the ground. Then, his fingers began to tug at his collar. Inexplicably, it was very hot. He was also a person who had seen thousands of flowers. How could he not know his current situation? Tilting his head, he looked at Su Cheng's beautiful face. It turned into the face he was familiar with. Yi Liangqiu. You're back. He pursed his lips into a smile and lay down. Come, let me hug you. He was drunk and seemed to want to sleep. If he could hug her, he would sleep better. Su Cheng adjusted her phone and pulled down her dress, revealing her white shoulders. Her petite body leaned into Qin Anlan's embrace and adjusted the angle of her kiss. Her expression was one of disgust, but she tried her best to look happy. After taking a few wonderful photos, she sent them to Yi Liangqiu. After that, she stuffed a pillow into Qin Anlan's hand and slept on the sofa. She had no interest in Qin Anlan. However, she was looking forward to seeing Yi Liangqiu's reaction when she saw those photos. Would she be angry? Would she bring her to the beach again and play the death game again? It was so exciting and fun. Chapter 1287. When Qin Anlan woke up, he saw Su Cheng's enlarged face. Shun Yin grunted and laid down flat. Then, he carefully felt his own body. He was an experienced man. Naturally, he could tell if they had done it or not. Su Cheng was lying on the side, looking happy. Anlan Ji, we did it. Qin Anlan glared at her for a long time. Then, he rubbed his eyes. Cheng Cheng, stop fooling around. Thinking about it, the alcohol he drank last night was a little strong, but it was not a village drug. How could he not know if they had done it or not? This was probably because Mrs. Su and Mr. Su had been waiting too long. Actually, Qin Anlan didn't quite understand. His reputation wasn't good, so why did Mr. Su and Mrs. Su like him and want to marry Su Cheng to him? He would not be a good husband, and they could not fail to know that. So, the only possibility left was a relationship of benefits. In comparison, Qin Anlan felt that Su Cheng was more honest and cute. At least, she had never plotted against him after spending so much time with him. Even if they were to sleep on the same bed, he would not have to worry about having another child. This was one of the reasons why he could peacefully create a scandal with Su Cheng for the past few years. Su Cheng giggled and said, Anlan Ji, I sent the photo to Sister Liangqiu. Qin Anlan got up and asked casually, what photo? Our bed photo, Su Cheng said matter-of-factly. I'm so happy. I got rid of another love rival. Qin Anlan's movements slowed down. Finally, he buttoned up his shirt and frowned. Cheng Cheng, why did you do this? Su Cheng raised her little face and hugged the blanket as she sat up. Because I like Anlan Ji. Qin Anlan's gaze was unfathomable. Su Cheng looked at him with a little fear and shrank back. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes. Really? If you really like me, I also lack a wife. As he spoke, he began to unbutton his shirt. Then let's do it first. Su Cheng didn't move at first. She just looked at Qin Anlan. She probably didn't believe that he would do it for real. Only when she was pinned under his body did she believe what he said was true. Anlan Ge, I was joking. Su Cheng stammered, we're fine like this. Qin Anlan stared at her and chuckled, really? But if you spend so much effort to get rid of your rival, it will make me misunderstand. His eyes were so sharp that Su Cheng almost thought that he had seen through something. After a while, she pushed him away and he didn't stop her. I just saw that you like Pei Chichi. I think that Yi Liangqiu has ulterior motives for Anlan Ge. I just want her to give up. Su Cheng pouted. Anlan Ge, I'm helping you. Qin Anlan's gaze was fixed. Then can you help me get Tang Yu's wife? Su Cheng glared at him. Anlan Ge, I really like you. Who are you trying to fool? Qin Anlan said coldly. He had already gotten off the bed and walked over to wash himself. He left before the two Su elders got up. Otherwise, no one would look good. Su Cheng followed behind him. Are you angry? Qin Anlan looked at her. What do you think? With that, he went downstairs. Su Cheng stood at the stairs and shouted at him, she doesn't belong to you. Chapter 1288. Su Cheng couldn't say anything. She just stared at Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan smiled at her and said, don't do this again. There's nothing going on between Yi Liangqiu and me. Su Cheng's breath caught in her throat. Nothing. Yi Liangqiu gave birth to a child because of you, and you say there's nothing going on casually. Su Cheng pursed her lips. Her heart ached a little. And this kind of pain was not known to others. It was the most obscure pain in her heart. She called out to Anlan Ge softly. Qin Anlan looked at her. Finally, she said, Anlan Ge, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just that you deserve to die. Qin Anlan walked out and got into his car. He immediately started the engine. He didn't slow down until the car was out of the Su house. He smoked a cigarette and put it on his lips. There was an indescribable frustration in his heart. He couldn't tell what it was. Finally, he drove the car to the front of King Entertainment's building. It was only 8 o'clock. There was still an hour before work started. Besides, Yi Liangqiu might not necessarily come. He sat in the car and smoked. After a while, he picked up his cell phone and dialed Keim's number. Tell Ying Jie to ask Yi Liangqiu to come to my office at 9 o'clock. Keim was a little hesitant. What if Miss Yi has a job? Qin Anlan's eyes were a little bloodshot. Then tell her to reject all of them. Get your ass over here right now. Keim had never seen President Qin so angry. He said yes in a low voice and hung up. On the other side, Qin Anlan held the cigarette and finished it fiercely. He went to the office and waited for 2 hours before Yi Liangqiu came. It was 10:30. Very well, she had never listened to him. When the door was pushed open, Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu. His eyes were still a little red. Yi Liangqiu closed the door, leaned against the door, and looked at him lightly. President Qin, if it's a private matter, I don't think it's necessary to talk about it. Qin Anlan interrupted her, it's business. Yi Liangqiu was slightly stunned, but she still walked over. She sat opposite Qin Anlan and looked at him. He was agitated, which was rare for him. There were already more than 10 cigarette butts in the ashtray in front of him. Qin Anlan looked up and met her eyes. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, the company has decided to send you to the United States to study. In the future, your focus will be Hollywood. The resources won't be bad. Yi Liangqiu wasn't surprised because Ying Jie had secretly revealed it to her before. However, Ying Jie had said that President Qin hadn't decided yet because her position in the country was stable. President Qin was also a little hesitant. At this moment, he suddenly decided. She vaguely felt that it had something to do with the photos that Su Cheng had posted last night. Because of Su Cheng? Yi Liangqiu looked down. Qin Anlan, are you sure? He looked at her. This is the company's decision. Isn't it your personal decision? Her attitude was also strong. Qin Anlan pursed his lips and said unhappily, Yi Liangqiu, what's your attitude? Yi Liangqiu smiled lightly. President Qin, do you think I should care about these things? His heart, slowly, sank bit by bit. Yi Liangqiu had never been an obedient person. I returned to the entertainment industry. I returned to King Entertainment purely for the money. She said to him bluntly. Not for you, President Qin. She had probably suppressed it for too long, and now she had to get it out. Chapter 1289. President Qin, anything between you and any woman has nothing to do with me, including who you sleep with. Yi Liangqiu smiled and sent him the photos on her phone. You probably haven't admired Su Cheng's photography skills, have you? It's great. Qin Anlan's phone on the table rang a few times. He picked it up and saw the photos she had sent. Or rather, they were photos taken by Su Cheng in bed. People who weren't there would never doubt that they had sex. They would definitely think that they had. He looked at them for a while and deleted the photos. President Qin, I'm sorry. I sold the photos of your fiancé to the media. It's not expensive, just $5,000 each. She smiled charmingly, but there was no smile in her eyes. Only she knew how sad it was. He wouldn't know that she couldn't sleep the whole night looking at these photos. After looking at these photos, she finally understood what it meant to give up. She knew that her little thoughts in the past were just a mistake and a joke. Really, all these years, with so many women coming and going, she had never encountered such an unbearable situation. In the end, it was Su Cheng who gave her a harsh wake-up call. Some people don't deserve to be loved. Because you don't exist in his heart at all. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at her in disbelief. He gritted his teeth. Yi Liangqiu, how dare you? There's nothing I wouldn't dare to do. She stood up slowly and placed her hands on both sides of the table. At this moment, her entire being was imposing. And all her aura was cultivated by him. All the fame and status that she had was given by him. But now, she was using it against him. Really, it was ironic. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at her. He smiled lightly. Very well. Yi Liangqiu's body leaned forward, and their faces were very, very close. It was a little ambiguous, but only they knew that both of them were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, Kaim happened to come in. Seeing them like this, he thought that they were kissing and quickly closed the door. Even so, Qin Anlan still roared, "Get lost." Yi Liangqiu appeared to be much calmer. She leaned closer to him, so close that he could smell the cold fragrance on her body. Her lips parted slightly. President Qin, I'll be waiting for you to freeze me. By the way, I'll be going back in a while. The people who are frozen don't have any jobs, right? There was a hint of mockery in her tone. Damn it. Damn it. Ever since Qin Anlan took over King Entertainment, Yi Liangqiu was the one he supported the most, and also, the one he hated the most. She wasn't afraid of him at all. The "you" that came out of her mouth was a mockery of him. From the bottom of her heart, she despised him. Qin Anlan's pupils contracted. He looked at her closely and then slowly said, "Do you really not care? No one would be willing to give up after standing at the top." Yi Liangqiu was an A-list celebrity, a celebrity. How could she give up just like that? It doesn't matter. She looked indifferent. It doesn't matter if President Qin freezes me for a year or 10 years. She leaned closer to him and spat out word by word, "I'm a leaf, a cold, an autumn, and a cold, and I don't want to do it anymore." This was the first time someone dared to challenge him like this. Qin Anlan closed his eyes. "As long as you don't regret it." Chapter 1290. Kaim was trembling on the other end of the line. It was a small matter that Miss Yi's work was scheduled for a year later, but the penalty fee was astronomical. It would add up to more than $1 billion, and King Entertainment had to foot the bill. To put it more bluntly, it was President Qin who had to foot the bill. Kaim's heart and soul were trembling. Yi Liangqiu was an A-lister in the entertainment industry. She had 78 million followers on Weibo. Why did President Qin have to do this? Why did he have to be angry with a little girl and with money? Why did he have to be angry? Qin Anlan hung up the phone forcefully. At the same time, the building of King Entertainment shook thrice. Yi Liangqiu smiled and lowered her eyes. President Qin, we'll never meet again. She left just like that. She opened the door and left without looking back. There was no reluctance, nor did she plead with him. Qin Anlan looked at the closed door. It was as if he had returned to that night a few years ago. She had come to the apartment to look for him and bumped into him and Shen Lian. She had been the same. She had left without saying a word. Now, her feelings, he didn't want to think about it. From the beginning, he had refused to have feelings for her. She was the only person he could hug and sleep soundly with. Hence, he didn't want to fall in love with her. Falling in love with her was equivalent to giving himself over completely. Qin Anlan wasn't willing. But when she left this time, he felt Yi Liangqiu's despair. She had really given up on him. Thinking about it, after seeing him and Su Cheng in bed with her own eyes, how could she not give up? Good thing. Qin Anlan smoked. He felt that the cigarette today was especially bitter. He couldn't help but curse. Then, he smashed everything on the table, in the cabinet. The office was a mess. There were broken pieces everywhere. There wasn't even a corner. When Kaim came over, it was like a typhoon had passed through. He said cautiously, Miss Yi has already left the company. Do you want Ying Jie to talk to her? Maybe she will change her mind. Qin Anlan's eyes were cold. No need. If she wanted to leave, then she should leave. Go far away, and it would be best if she could come back after a few years. But this time, she did not ask for it back. There were some things that even Qin Anlan couldn't control well. What a cute separator. In the second month after Yi Liangqiu left, he found himself lying on a speedboat after a hangover. He remembered that he was with Su Cheng and had a drink. Later, Shen Lian came to find him. He couldn't remember what happened after that. When he woke up, he saw Pei Chichi in front of him. Pei Chichi was wearing a wedding gown. Wasn't she married? Why was she with him? Why would she ask if he was sober? His body was very hot, and he instinctively knew that he had been drugged. He thought that Su Cheng was just fooling around and didn't dare to do anything. But when he woke up, he vaguely felt that all of this had something to do with Su Cheng. He and Pei Chichi fell into the sea together. Pei Chichi lost her memory, and he became her husband. Her nominal husband. She didn't love him. Even after losing her memory, she didn't love him. After trying for a month, she couldn't accept him, so they slept in separate rooms. Qin Anlan saw Yi Liangqiu again a year later. He returned to B City and didn't leave for 2 days because he was afraid that Tang Yu would find out. When he left, he saw Yi Liangqiu at the airport with a man and a 5 or 6-year-old boy. Chapter 1291. Qin Anlan just watched like that, his gaze landing on her. The young man put his hand on her shoulder. Then, he carried the child with one hand and hugged her with the other. The family of 3 looked happy and harmonious. It was true. Very good. Qin Anlan chuckled. She was really good. She was living a good life. It turned out that she was willing to retire from the entertainment industry because she wanted to live a peaceful life. It was good. Qin Anlan lowered his eyes. After a while, he opened them again and met her eyes. She was on the ladder over there, and he was here. Their bodies passed each other, and then they gradually drifted apart. Qin Anlan didn't greet her. He just looked at her coldly. Yi Liangqiu did the same. From the day they broke up, they didn't need to be polite to each other anymore. However, at this moment, he felt a sense of anger from being deceived. She already had someone else. Why did she pretend to be sad and angry about Su Cheng's matter? Just as their eyes met, there was too much pain in his eyes that she couldn't understand. Even he couldn't understand, it was deeply engraved in his heart. Dr. Lin also saw him and asked Yi Liangqiu in a low voice, "Do you need to say hello?" She didn't feel comfortable at first, so she didn't reject him when he carried her. However, in the man's eyes, there was a hint of warmth. Dr. Lin knew that man. He was Qin Anlan, the president of King Entertainment. Mu Yun was his son. Dr. Lin carefully pressed Mu Yun's face against the side of her neck, so that Qin Anlan couldn't see it. It was up to Yi Liangqiu to say it or not. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked up at Dr. Lin. After a while, she said softly, "Let's go." So, they walked side by side slowly and passed by Qin Anlan. Some things, once missed once, would be missed forever. She couldn't tell if she had any expectations for him after that, but she knew that after seeing those photos of Su Cheng, she decided not to. Because she couldn't stand the thought of another woman appearing by his side at any time. She wanted love to be single-minded, not to say that he was charity, she and others to share. Gradually, they went further and further away. Qin Anlan arrived at the underground parking lot and felt that the lights in the parking lot were particularly dim today. It wasn't until he sat in the car and old Zhong spoke to him that he came back to his senses. "I just bumped into someone I know." Although it was the middle of the night, old Zhong was still in high spirits. "Young master, I saw Miss Yi just now, and she even brought a child. Looking at this child, I'm afraid Miss Yi has already hidden her marriage." Qin Anlan pursed his thin lips and scolded, "You talk too much." Old Zhong didn't dare to continue. He shut up and drove. However, Qin Anlan felt as if a stone had been thrown into his heart, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. Moreover, there was a fishy sweetness in his mouth, and he swallowed it. Old Zhong drove the car to the destination, and Qin Anlan came out 2 hours after the appointment. When he came out, it was already 1 o'clock at night. His original plan was to return to New York immediately, but he changed his mind while sitting in the car. He called Yi Liangqiu's phone. "Are you free? Let's have a cup of coffee together." On the other side, Yi Liangqiu was still awake. She had just settled Mu Yun, and Dr. Lin was still there. She looked at Dr. Lin and covered the phone. "Qin Anlan." She didn't cover it tightly, and Qin Anlan heard. "A man. Was it that man?" Chapter 1292. A man's instinct told him that the person talking to her was a man, and it was the man he had seen earlier today. He chuckled. "Forget it if it's not convenient." "There's nothing inconvenient about it," Yi Liangqiu said quickly and asked for the address. Dr. Lin watched her take the car keys and said worriedly, "I'll drive you." Yi Liangqiu shook her head and refused. "No need, I'll drive myself." She paused. "Don't go back tonight. Sleep in the guest room." She had known Dr. Lin for a long time and he would sleep here occasionally because of Mu Yun, so there was nothing wrong with it. Dr. Lin nodded. Before she left, he suddenly patted her shoulder. "Call me if you need anything." Yi Liangqiu smiled at him and turned to leave. Dr. Lin looked at her back and chuckled. This was the most beautiful Yi Liangqiu he had ever seen, the most authentic Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan was meeting Yi Liangqiu in a private capacity. By the time she arrived at the cafe, it was already late at night. The coffee he ordered was already cold. Fortunately, the weather was hot, so it wasn't cold. Yi Liangqiu took a small sip and said faintly, "Do you want to catch up, Chief Qin?" They hadn't seen each other for a year. It wasn't because she didn't appear at King Entertainment, but because he wasn't in B City. Although she wasn't around, there were always people who would tell her about the gossip. For example, Su Cheng. Su Cheng said that Qin Anlan had another woman outside. Su Cheng said that Qin Anlan only returned to B City once in a while. But these were all things that Su Cheng had said, and Yi Liangqiu had never been at ease. Now that she was sitting face to face with him, she felt like she was in a trance. "Are you all right?" He took a sip of coffee and put down the cup in his hand, asking her calmly. Yi Liangqiu didn't drink. She just rubbed the cup with her fingers. Her stomach wasn't good, so she couldn't drink anything cold. If she did, her stomach would hurt. However, he did not know. Or maybe he knew but didn't care. She remembered that she had reminded him before. "Pretty good. What about you?" Qin Anlan didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he continued softly, Have you been together for a long time? How old is the child? Yi Liangqiu's fingers paused. She understood that he was asking about Dr. Lin and Mu Yun. Lowering his eyes, he said, "Yeah, we got together a few years ago. The child is 4.5 years old now." She was 1 year off. Qin Anlan's expression changed. He suddenly leaned forward and moved closer. He looked at her brows and asked through gritted teeth, "You clearly have a man. Why did you still sleep with me that time?" That time. Yi Liangqiu held the cup with her fingers and her smile faded. "At that time, I wasn't with him yet. Furthermore, it was so long ago. There's no need for President Qin to bring it up again. No need." Qin Anlan repeated himself. After staying silent for a long time, he said, "Yi Liangqiu, I'm married." "What?" She raised her eyes and looked at him. Her pupils contracted violently and her fingers that were holding the cup trembled slightly. She thought that she wouldn't be surprised by such news. Su Cheng had told her many times that Qin Anlan was with someone else, and it was true love. True love? Is it? Pei Chichi? Yi Liangqiu asked softly. Chapter 1293. She's Tang Yu's wife. Isn't she afraid of retribution? She stared at his eyes, not letting go of his expression. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. She has forgotten everything. She only remembers me now. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling. She doesn't love you, does she? But I love her. Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. When I'm with her, it's like returning to. He didn't finish his sentence and suddenly paused. But Yi Liangqiu caught his hesitation. She looked at him and asked word by word, "It's like returning to the time when I was your sleeping pill and pillow, right?" She looked at him. "Qin Anlan, do you need this feeling, or does she need it? Have you really loved her? Or anyone else? Have you ever thought about her willingness?" She asked him back with a little agitation. After asking, she drank a cup of coffee. It was so cold that her heart was about to freeze. Qin Anlan pursed his lips. "Yi Liangqiu, she is different from you." She raised her chin. "What's different about her? Is it because you love her more than usual?" Suddenly, for some reason, Qin Anlan said, "I have never had sex with her." Very pure. A very touching fairy tale. Yi Liangqiu smiled coldly. "And President Qin doesn't need to tell me about this." She got up and walked to the entrance of the cafe. She cried because she didn't expect him to say this to her. He said that he loved someone else and was willing to be with her even if they didn't have sex. Yi Liangqiu wiped her tears. She laughed at herself. She laughed at herself. She laughed at how she had never been anything in his heart. She actually came to see him so late at night. There was still a glimmer of hope in her heart. She hoped that he could say that what Su Cheng said was not true. It turned out that it was all true. Just as she was full of coffee, an arm caught her. She was dragged into a deserted passageway. It was dimly lit and there was no one there. There was only the dark night, Yi Liangqiu, and Qin Anlan in front of her. "You are married," she whispered, looking up at him. Her eyes were watery, dazzling in such a night. Her beauty was so dazzling that it made one's heart ache. "Yes." His voice was deep. In fact, Qin Anlan didn't know how to express himself to her. Only he knew in his heart that in the past year, it might not have been because he wanted to fulfill Chichi's wish, which was why he didn't force himself to have sex with her. In fact, in his heart, he was somewhat resistant. He actually resisted having sex with the woman he liked. Even he himself felt that it was inconceivable. But he really, really liked her. This could not be doubted. However, when he was facing Yi Liangqiu, he had an even deeper impulse. The pure bestiality of a man wanted to explode on her. Moreover, she was wrong. Sleeping with Pei Chichi made his sleep worse. Pei Chichi wasn't his sleeping pill, nor was she his pillow. They were more like a fake couple who shared a strange bed. However, he still stubbornly refused to give up. Even when he saw Yi Liangqiu's family of 3, he directly told her that he was married. Her reaction was beyond his expectations. His body trapped her between his arms and the narrow wall. If he lowered his head, he would be able to see her eyes. Chapter 1294. Her body trembled lightly as she looked up at him. She didn't avoid his gaze. Qin Anlan, I'm not unhappy, nor am I happy. She smiled. Have you forgotten? We're strangers who have nothing to do with each other. He had long forgotten that she used to be in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, making breakfast for him, making lunch for him, and making the bed for him. He would sit on the bed and pat the spot next to him, asking her to sleep with him. At that time, it was as if he was summoning a puppy beside him. God knew that she hated being treated as a pet the most. But at that time, she felt very happy. He was the one who didn't want her. Why did he have to tease her now, after he had someone else? Her smile deepened as she looked at him. I have no reason to be unhappy. I've been married for a long time. You've been married for a long time? He looked at her. Do you have a child after marriage? No matter before or after marriage, it won't be President Qin's child. She sneered. Don't tell me that President Qin made me take the morning after pill after that time with me. She looked at him and smiled. Do you want me to explain the meaning of the morning after pill to you? Don't say it. His voice was very soft, and his body slowly let go of her. He closed his eyes slightly as if he was thinking of the past. Compared to the life he had with Yi Liangqiu in the past, his life with Pei Chichi was more like that of a brother and sister. It was very safe. Even if Pei Chichi took off her clothes and stood in front of him now, he could still bear it. In the past, when he was with Yi Liangqiu, he had to repeatedly emphasize to himself that it was safe for her to do so. In the end, he was the one who violated the taboo, but he forced her to promise herself that she wouldn't cross the line again. She hated him, and there was a reason for that. Qin Anlan let go of her and slowly took 2 steps back. His voice was low. You're living well now. It's the right decision for us to separate. With that, he gave her a deep look. That one glance had allowed her to understand many things. He turned and left, disappearing into the boundless dark night. Yi Liangqiu raised her hand and covered her mouth. She tried her best to hold it in and looked at his back. Qin Anlan, you idiot, you don't even know who you love. Actually, you fell in love with me a long time ago, but you always stubbornly told yourself that you can't have feelings for goods. You fool, poor thing. You live with someone else and you don't force her. Is it really because of love? If he didn't love her, he wouldn't force her. Fool, fool. Was it really good to waste time like this? Fool, I hate you. She sobbed and slowly squatted down. Between the cracks in the wall, it began to drizzle. She didn't care and just squatted there and cried. She hated him. She hated how easily he got together with someone else. Had he ever asked her if she was willing? Had he ever given her a chance? Never. A figure stood in front of her, his voice gentle. You're already so old, yet you're still crying. She suddenly raised her eyes and looked at the person in front of her in confusion. All right, don't cry anymore. Go wash your face. He pulled her up and reached out to gently wipe her tears. It's a little cold outside. Go wash up. I'll go in and order a cup of hot coffee for you. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. Her fingers rested gently on his waist and her face rested on his shoulder. Xing Yuan, thank you. At this moment, she needed some comfort. She needed a shoulder to lean on. Chapter 1295. He watched her and her husband hug each other. She was so soft in the arms of another man, and his heart ached slightly. Once, she belonged to him. She used to be like this, crying in his arms and smiling in his arms. She also used to call him Anlan and be with him from dawn to dawn. Qin Anlan watched quietly, watched them embrace each other, watched her cry in someone else's arms. At that moment, Qin Anlan heard the sound of his heart breaking, but he didn't know if it was hers or his. He didn't know how long he watched, but he saw her sit in the cafe again. The man helped her order coffee and personally delivered it to her. He sat beside her and even placed his fingers on the back of her hand. She didn't refuse. Yes, how could she refuse? She and that person were together from the start. Qin Anlan pursed his lips. As he watched, he felt that it was meaningless. It was him, not her first. He slowly backed away and finally left. When he sat in the car, old Zhong asked softly, "Young master, are we going to the airport?" The private plane was already prepared, and the young master had been delayed for a long time. Qin Anlan pursed his lips. After a long while, he gave a faint grunt of agreement. Old Zhong immediately started the car and said, "Did you see Miss Yi just now?" Other than Kaim, old Zhong was probably the only one who knew the best about the relationship between Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu. Although it wasn't said explicitly, old Zhong knew that Yi Liangqiu and his young master had lived together. At first, he thought that his young master had made up his mind because he really didn't have any women during that period of time. However, he didn't expect that such a beautiful girl like Miss Yi couldn't keep his young master's heart. In the end, it was still over. He saw that Miss Yi was with someone else. Old Zhong didn't know about Pei Chichi. At this moment, he looked at his young master's face and thought to himself, "Young master must be touched. You didn't take the little girl seriously in the past, but now she doesn't want to kiss you. Are you upset?" Qin Anlan didn't speak along the way. Laro Zhong couldn't help but say, "Young master, if you really like it, as long as the man and woman are unmarried, it's not impossible." He spoke for a long time, but there was no response. Thus, old Zhong muttered again, "Actually, men and women are just like that. What does Miss Yi have with others? It's fine. Isn't young master also?" What he said after that was not very pleasant to hear. Qin Anlan knew what Laro Zhong wanted to say without listening. He opened his half-closed eyes and glared at Laro Zhong. Old Zhong did not dare to make another sound. He seemed to have said something terrible, probably that the young master couldn't accept Miss Yi belonging to someone else. But he was the one who didn't want the young lady. She was the best actress, so how could she wait for him? Dream on. Old Zhong shut up, but Qin Anlan's heart didn't calm down. As long as he closed his eyes, his mind would be filled with the scene of Yi Liangqiu throwing herself into Lin Xingyuan's arms. She had acted in a lot of love scenes. Many of them were about her throwing herself into someone's arms, and there were even real kissing scenes. However, no matter how real those scenes were, they were still acting. This time, it was real in front of him. That kind of shock shocked him. Qin Anlan's lips tightened. When they reached the airport, he got out of the car and told old Zhong, "Don't talk too much, especially in front of old madam. Do you hear me? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.